Hi there, and welcome to the Astrology Hub podcast. My name's Amanda Walsh, and I'm the founder of Astrology Hub. And I wanted to come on today and properly introduce you to our very special guest, Richard Tarnas. I also wanted to prepare you for what ended up being one of my favorite podcast episodes of all time. And I do not say that lightly. I think in a very few minutes, you are going to understand for yourself why I'm saying that. So, for those of you who don't know him, Richard is a living legend in the astrological world. Many of you astrology students probably have at least one of his books sitting on your bookshelf right now. He's the founding director of the graduate program in philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness at the California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco, where he currently teaches. He's also the author of the acclaimed The Passion of the Western Mind and Cosmos and Psyche. He's on the board of governors of the C.G. Jung Institute of San Francisco, and he gives many public lectures and seminars around the US and abroad. In this episode, you're going to get to experience Richard's brilliant mind. There is no doubt about that. But what will really blow you away is his beautiful heart. So for the next 75 minutes, you're going to learn about Richard's journey from astrological skeptic to astrological pundit, how astrology was and is perceived in the academic world, the pivotal astrological understanding that changed Richard's life for the last 40 years, the best way to help astrology spread across the globe, and a question I love to ask living astrological legends, which is, how and why does astrology work? So if you can allow yourself just a little bit of space to settle in, relax, and really receive this episode, I am confident that you're going to walk away with deep astrological insights and wisdom. And you will be so warmed by the beauty of his heart and the poetry of his words. I hope you enjoy this treasure of an episode as much as I did. Enjoy. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome. And today we are honored to have with us Rick Tarnas. And this is the first time that we are having Rick on our platform. And I am just so thrilled and so honored, Rick, that you're here with us today and that we get to have this discussion centered around your book, Cosmos and Psyche, but also just about your astrological journey in general. So welcome, and we're so happy that you're here.
Thanks, Amanda. I'm happy to be here. It's an honor at my end as well. So thank you.
Perfect. All right. So let's start. Since this is your first time on the Astrology Hub podcast, I love to ask astrologers how they came to astrology and just a little bit about your journey, how you got to where you are today. So can we start there, please?
Sure. I sometimes think that astrology enters into our world rather and with almost its own agency more than we choose to enter it into astrology. It came with its own timing and also with a series of kind of almost like gestures towards me until I was ready, But I first ran into any discussion of astrology when I was in college. I was in Cambridge, Massachusetts, at Harvard, and my actually was the psychotherapist, the Jungian analyst of my Radcliffe girlfriend at that point, who later befriended me, and in discussions we would have about, he was from Switzerland. He'd been trained by Jung, Carl Gustav Jung, the great psychologist, psychiatrist, and we just had discussions about European ideas and Freud and Jung and so forth, depth psychology. And one day in one of our conversations, he must have asked me for my birth date. I can't imagine that he went so far as to ask me even for my birth time. But my birth date, I also happen to have been born in Switzerland, so in Geneva. So we had that in common. So he came into one of our conversations with a little list of where my planets were, um, and it wasn't like a horoscope, but it was just, your sun's in Pisces, your moon's in Aries. Might have even said some aspects, and I just thought, what has happened to our normally rather, kind of the higher intellectual road that we are used to traveling together? And as quickly as I could, I sort of steered the conversation back onto more of our usual topics. And that was the first knock on the door, as it were. And but I think I took note of it, the fact that someone I really respected, and of course I really respected Jung, uh, and Jung had trained this psychiatrist himself. So I I had perhaps some alert to there's something going on here with astrology. I think the next thing was maybe a couple of years later reading Rudolf Steiner, who not only was, gave gestures of support towards astrology, but also gave me a frame of reference for understanding how it could work. Namely, that basically everything material in the cosmos, everything that we see physically, is in some sense an expression of an embodiment of spiritual realities, of spiritual dimensions. That made a lot of sense to me. Uh, and then, but the final step was not till after I'd left Harvard, come to the West Coast, and went to Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California, where I ended up living for 10 years and studying with a lot of the people there, and then becoming director of programs. And the person I was especially, I was studying with Joseph Campbell and Houston Smith and Gregory Bates and others like that, but it was particularly Stan Grof that I came there to study with, who was the world's expert in psychedelic therapy. And he and I was working on my dissertation, and he was my supervisor at that point. We later became, good friends and colleagues, and now have taught graduate seminars for 30 years together. But we had always been interested in trying to understand, why is it that some people have one type of LSD experience or psychedelic experience using the exact same substance, the same dosage level, and even the same setting, but would have such radically different experiences. Those of you who are listening to us here, who have some familiarity with psychedelic experiences, know what I'm talking about, because this not only happens between different people, but also to the same person at different times. You can have such different experiences. So I we were interested in pursuing why that would be the case, and were there any intrinsic factors in a person that, or in a particular time, that would lend give us some help in understanding how a person would respond. And none of the conventional psychological tests like the Rorschach or the TAT had any predictive value for this. And it was only when someone who was in one of the seminars at Esalen that Stan Grof had organized, and after hearing one of Stan's lectures, he said, he happened to be an artist, but he also was deeply versed in astrology. He followed his own transits very carefully. And he said, in my experience, the quality of what a person's particular experience is at any given time is related to their birth chart and also to the transits that are going across their birth chart. And Stan and I were, even though astrology was still over the paradigm boundary line of what we thought would be a plausible direction, we were open enough to, like, well, you've got to experiment. You have to see. Don't close off possibilities just on the basis of prior assumptions. And so he this man, his name was Arnie Tretovec, no longer alive now, and he kindly showed us how to calculate birth charts. This was like 1975, early 76, right around the mid 70s, and we were quite, you didn't have any personal computers at that point. Everything's done by hand, but um, it's fairly simple mathematics to do the calculations. You just have to know what to do and have the right books, and uh, so we learned how to calculate charts. We learned how to calculate transits, and to our astonishment, after all these years of trying out these other standard psychological tests, the astrological approach turned out to be the one that gave us the most consistent and precise indication of not only the archetypal quality of the experiences that people would be going through, but also the timing. Like, so different individuals seem to have different tendencies, different themes that seem to come up a lot, over the years, and those are more like enduring predispositions in a person's psyche. But then there are other, by bringing in the transits, we're able to see the timing of how different parts of a person's chart and sort of psychological world, the different archetypal complexes that they have inside them, could be activated or constellated in different ways and with different combinations at different times. And so to suddenly, because we had good records of both our own sessions and many of Stan's patients from his earlier years in Prague and at the working in Maryland under a National Institute of Mental Health program there in the late 60s and early 70s, we had great data to work with. And just looking at all the correlations opened us up to how helpful this would be. Then I started studying everybody's birth chart at Esalen. Everybody started lining up to get their transits and everything. And then because Esalen was a place where many people came every week and every weekend, probably 100 new people would come just to explore themselves, to go through transformational experiences. It was like the greatest laboratory for testing out, the astrological hypothesis and looking for the correlations. And because people were going through these transformational experiences in ways that they hadn't priorly. So it was, we were able to see, well, look at what transits are going on here. These Uranus transits, they're crossing that person's Jupiter or their sun. And this doesn't happen very often, and it's right during, or maybe just once in a lifetime with a conjunction, and it's right then that they're having these awakening experiences, these sudden openings, and then under other transits they go through other kinds of experiences that are, have a more Saturnian quality, more Plutonic, more Neptunian. So that's basically, then I started looking at world history and how the world transits, the larger planetary cycles that we all go through of the outer planets, how those connect to history. I'd spent my life studying history, and as Stan Groff said, after a couple of years of our research, and he just said, it's turned out that that archetypal astrology is like the Rosetta Stone of the human psyche. It's just the most useful frame of reference and some symbol system that one could imagine for entering into a deeper understanding of the human psyche and its vicissitudes. So, bit of a long answer, but you've asked in a way for a little bit of a personal life journey, and so that's kind of condensing that part of it that's astrologically focused.
Oh gosh, I love it so much, Rick. I love that the first time it got brought up to you from that colleague, the first time that you just
Yes.
sort of saw the information and then changed the subject. I know so many of us in this community have had that kind of experience where you bring it up and then all of a sudden the conversation changes. The person's not open to it at all in the moment, but that it just kept finding you and finding you. And then you got into a position where it was impossible to ignore the data.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's just, it's fascinating to me. I have so many follow-up questions from that.
Let's go. And I'll try to be more concise in
No,
my
no, it's
responses.
perfect. You don't need to do anything different. It's perfect. I'm loving listening to you. And I know that our audiences as well. Okay. So I'll start with one question, which is you've been in a very academic environment. You've been in a very academic world, and in an academic world, astrology, even now, this was in the 70s, 80s, 90s. I mean, you've been doing this for a long time. Astrology is not yet accepted as a legitimate academic pursuit. So how has that experience been for you? And do you feel you've been able to make any headway, and or do you even try anymore?
No, that's bringing up, in a sense, a whole nother dimension of my life. And again, it's a very good question. And because I received, first I was educated by the Jesuits in earlier years, learning Latin and Greek and what they called classical studies. So there you learn about Plato and the Platonic archetypal ideas or forms. So then when astrology came in, it was very clear in reading the descriptions of people's in different astrological handbooks that what they were talking about could not only be understood as Jungian archetypes, that is, kind of psychological principles, forces, patterns, etc., but also as Platonic archetypes. That is, the basic idea with Plato is that you have there's many beautiful things in the world, experiences, people, sunsets, flowers, music, etc. But from Plato's point of view, there is an archetypal principle, or as it were, god or goddess of the beautiful, capital B, that all things that are beautiful that we experience in our human world, in our embodied world, all things that are beautiful participate in archetypal beauty, capital B, in the beautiful. And the very principle of it, it's kind of like that god or goddess enters into and expresses its particular energies in our experience. That's basically the Platonic point of view. And that there's this eternal dimension, this archetypal dimension that informs our everyday world. And it was very clear that as I was coming to understand what the astrological approach was kind of revealing, that so much of the history of philosophy suddenly made new sense to me. Later, I discovered that the whole unfolding of, like, the timing of which philosophers and which philosophies become more prominent at a certain time, those also had deeper astrological and archetypal factors at work. But at that point, I could see that far from being this kind of most scorned of intellectual activities, astrology actually beautifully connects to the longer, deeper tradition, as it does with that's the deeper, kind of classical European, Greco-Roman, Renaissance, etc. That tradition in so-called Western civilization. But obviously, astrology is also connected to all the other cultural worldviews that existed before the modern, or that exist outside the Western context, in which the cosmos is seen as being ensouled, as being enchanted, as that as above, so below, that what's happening in the heavens and what's happening on earth are somehow part of a larger unity. Everything breathes together, as the philosopher Plotinus put it. And so, to be honest, now when I think about the issue of how, and I've talked to many astrological at conferences and so forth, like in England or here in the States, about this very fact that astrologers are in this very unique position of knowing that they have available to them, that they've been given access to a form of understanding, an approach to understanding life that is almost unparalleled in its capacity to illuminate, give more insight into almost anything, whether you're talking about your own psyche or interpersonal relations or the history of philosophy or economics or political and social movements, you name it. The arts, like understanding, the birth chart and the transits of a given film director or an actor or actress or or musician, etc., composers. It's so illuminating. And yet we live with this kind of contradiction of being surrounded by a society in which, while there are many, many people who are deeply into astrology, as the Astrology Hub attests, on the other hand, you have this paradox that the intellectual authorities of the high culture that are particularly prominent in the universities, the academic world, and that in a sense dictate what is intellectually worthwhile and substantive, and what should be just marginalized or regarded as superstitious. We all live in a world in which that astrological approach that we who are astrologically initiated, we value so much because of what it provides to us. And yet it is the most scorned perspective. I like to describe it as being it's the gold standard of astrology is the gold standard of superstition in our culture, because if a person wants to talk about a particular topic, a particular field of interest as being completely ludicrous and unworthy of really serious consideration, then they will compare it to astrology. That's the go-to
analogy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Oh, wow.
yeah, and so the result is we kind of live in this uh, totally contradictory situation. And what I say to astrologers is that this, in some ways, is almost to be expected, because anyone who's been on a spiritual path knows that often it's the deepest spiritual mysteries and truths are concealed, and yet are completely evident to those whose eyes are open. But they tend to be veiled. They tend to be protected in a certain way. And in addition, so it's something as like the most powerful mystical and spiritual epiphanies, the real illuminations, have one waking up and seeing, oh my God, this has always been there. Life has always been this sacred or whatever. But I didn't see it, but it was there. It was as obvious as the sky. And that's kind of the astrological universe is there in the night sky. And I mean, it was actually my being a night guard in the earliest years at Esalen that I was up all night on the grounds there on the coast of the Pacific at Esalen, looking up after everybody's either gone to sleep or was peaceful at the hot springs, the baths there at Esalen. I could just take an hour and look at the heavens that are on the cliff and watch the stars and figure out the constellations and where the planets were, and watch them move from rising to setting across the horizon over the Pacific. And it was almost like a kind of numinous kind of transmission was happening, not to put too inflated a description of it. And And I think that's basically what most peoples prior to the modern era lived in, a universe that had that available to them. Um, so what what I also say to astrologers is this is a very good, in some ways, it's a very good compensation. Having your profession or your, as it were, esoteric knowledge that you've been initiated into, that in some ways you've been graced by, that having that come into your life, it's it can be a temptation to get inflated. It can be a temptation to feel that one is somehow superior to other people, superior to everybody who doesn't know about this, and um, and yet it's so important for anybody on a serious spiritual journey to uh, avoid inflation, to see through that hubris, and people who do get inflated will tend to bring towards them experiences that will deflate them. That will, it's just the way it works, and that life tends to design itself for our unfolding. And so my sense is that it could be really seen as a kind of blessing that we have this compensation, to just know that we've been given a blessing. At the same time, we're not necessarily going to be recognized for that by the the worldly authorities that are most highly regarded by the conventional society. That's okay, because the astrologer, if they're deep into their participation with the astrological mystery, they are in a relationship to a mystery, they're in relationship to a kind of sacred dimension of being that is a constant gracing of their life. And that's all you need. It's like everybody else in the, you know this, if you're in a relationship, that you're really in love with your partner and your partner's really in love with you, and it almost doesn't matter what the rest of the world thinks if you about you, if you know you have this blessing, this this special relationship. And that's what every astrologer has with the universe. Every I think deeply respectful and any astrologer who doesn't get too inflated with their own sense of nailing down the mystery, which you can never do.
You're making
Another
me
short
cry.
answer.
I mean, Rick, you're making me cry. That was so beautiful and so true. And I know so many people in this community can feel that gift of a relationship, which continues on a daily basis to delight and surprise and bring a sense of magic into everyday world, everyday reality. And to think of that as compensation for, okay, not everybody's going to get this. Not everybody's going to get me. Not everybody's going to love this the way I love it. Not everyone's going to understand my affinity towards it, but that's okay, because I have this almost like the secret world that I get to participate in and enjoy. And the door's open for anybody else to enter into that when they're ready and if they want to. But for now, I'll just appreciate that I have that. I mean, I love that so much, what you just said.
Yeah, it's a kind of interior. It's a kind of interior enrichment that is constantly replenishing itself. And
Yes.
every time you're looking at a birth chart or getting an insight, a correlation with what's going on in your life, like, now I understand why, I got so irritated there in a way that was with a particular person or situation that in retrospect seems like I might have been overreacting. And then I look at, well, oh, wow, Mars was squaring my sun or whatever, or my moon. And every time you get just something like that, not only does that help you have psychological insight about yourself and perhaps be more skillful in how we live, but also it's a little gesture by the universe of here's a tip, my friend.
Yes.
So
Oh,
yeah. There's one other thing that your question brings up, which has been kind of central for me over these last. It kind of shaped my life for the last 30 years, which I could mention if we don't want to go to another question right
please.
away.
Oh no. Yes, let's hear the central thing that has shaped your life for 30 years. Please.
Well, and that is that I guess it was 40 years, but because once I got after about 5 years, I had just at that point taken in so much astrological um, kind of downloading and studied. And I fortunately in those years I would have people like Robert Hand. He had just come out with planets in transit at that point, so I could invite him to come to Esalen and give lectures, or Charles Harvey, the president of the British Astrological Association, or Zipporah Dobbins, and people back in the it was so it was really nice to be able to be in contact with all these lifelong astrologers, and but I could see that because of my what particular background or education or whatever, and also the setting of where I was, the teachers and scholars that I was in contact with, I thought, I should write a book that might help bridge from the esoteric world to the exoteric world, and so that is, in other words, help make astrology more intelligible and attractive to people who might have been like myself, where it just wasn't on their radar screen. So I started out writing a book that I would basically first have a kind of introductory chapter giving a little history of the Western worldview to show how we came out of a philosophical, religious, cosmological world or frame of reference that in which astrology was part of it, or that in which the universe was seen as being intelligent and coherent with human consciousness and so forth, and then moved into one that in which astrology is marginalized or is eclipsed, is just seen as being having no real relation to the actual universe that science understands. So I wanted to trace that basically, like from Plato and Aristotle right up to Jung and so forth, but through the astronomical revolutions that Copernicus, Kepler, Galileo, all of whom were astrologers. Well, both Kepler and Galileo were astrologers. Newton was an alchemist, and Copernicus didn't use any, like most people in the Renaissance. He described astrology and astronomy as being completely interlinked and not one good and one the other not. Mm-hmm. So, but interestingly, out of the Copernican revolution and out of the scientific revolution emerged the disenchanted mechanistic worldview that we're all educated within in contemporary education. And so I wanted to kind of give people the historical and philosophical background that would help them understand, once you bring in depth psychology and Freud and Jung and the archetypal psychologists like James Hillman, the great many other important depth psychologists. Once you bring in this larger frame of reference, then introduce astrology as being something that is not as incoherent with their education. And the fact that three of the psychologists who most influenced me, Jung, James Hillman, the founder of archetypal psychology, and Stan Grof, the founder of transpersonal psychology, the fact that all three of them were deeply interested in astrology, and they all believed that it was extremely valuable, made it easy for me to feel the confidence that my own encounter with the evidence was giving me. So I started writing this, and what happened was what turned out to be what was going to be just this one chapter, and then I was going to set out the astrological evidence. And that one chapter grew on the history of the Western worldview, philosophy, religion, science, etc. That grew into a full book. I realized, wow, this is going to be too big a book, so I should just publish this part, the history part, the intellectual, cultural history, as one book. Astrology isn't, and this isn't the astrological book, but it prepares for it. And I published that with Random House, Valentine, but they knew that I had this, that this was going to be a sequel to, or that would be the prequel, so to speak, to Cosmos and Psyche, which was the main thing that I was going to write. But what happened was Passion of the Western Mind, which is how the first book was titled, or how I titled it. When it came out, it became a bestseller, and it started being used in a lot of universities as it still is, including like Harvard and Cambridge and so forth. It's used in history of philosophy courses, history and Western civilization courses, that kind of thing, at seminaries. And so I was asked to become a professor myself, which I still am here in San Francisco, California Institute of Integral Studies. And I got so busy with the teaching and all the responsibilities. We had a new doctoral program, master's and doctorate, that I founded called Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness Program, with lots of great faculty members in it. Brian Swim and Joanna Macy, Stan Groff, and so forth, that it took me 15 years before I then finally was done with Cosmos and Psyche and published that in 2006. So it turned out that Passion of the Western Mind, this wasn't my intention, but it turned out to be a kind of Trojan horse, so that many people who had been using Passion of the Western Mind read it, respected it, knew me. I'd be invited to conferences, still am, to universities and so forth. That when Cosmos and Psyche came out, they thought astrology, but then they read the book, and for many of them it opened them up, and so that was an unexpected blessing.
So you sort of paved the way with something that was more universally appealing for more academics. And then when you came in to introduce astrology, it was already, the field was fertile already. The seeds had been planted. And so you were able to come in. And has it had the response that you would want it to have? Like, do you feel like it's opened a lot of doors, or as many doors as you hoped it would?
Of course, I did not know what the reception would be, and it actually is adopted in some places, some particularly sort of forward-moving, progressive universities or seminaries and so forth, but where it's had the biggest impact is, within the Jungian world. I'm invited all over to the different Jung institutes and associations and societies around the country, also in Europe, like at Eranos in Switzerland, where Jung lectured every year. So that, and of course the astrological world has been very open to it, and I often lecture at their conferences and so forth. And because I am in both worlds, I can bring something of what I hope is a helpful bridge, to, and that's what I encourage people who are deeply into astrology, but also are wanting to serve as a they'd like to bring astrology to more of the world than already has been initiated into it. How can they do that? Well, I think the way to do it is to become really good in some other discipline as well, whether it's being a psychotherapist or being you know, a high school English teacher or a film critic, whatever it is. Become really good at that. You find whatever is you feel a certain competence at, and that you take joy in doing, and you find and also if it is helpful to others, and if you can find some a pursuit that gives you that, it answers those imperatives of that you have a kind of almost intrinsic pull towards it, that your competence just seems to come. Not that you don't try hard too, but it seems to be there as an available potential. But you also take joy in it, creative joy. It's coming through you in some sense, almost like you're being used by something to flower, and then that it is useful to others. That's an important thing too, that you're not just in your own little isolated seclusion, but that it is something that, I mean, God knows we are in a time that the whole world needs everybody on deck, giving what they can. So if you do that, then you will know the language. You will be respected by people who are within other domains, as a psychotherapist, as an humanities professor, or whatever it happens to be, a critic of music who puts out music reviews on a weekly blog, whatever it happens to be, and then you're in a position to be a bridge, and people will have already respected you for this one area that they know that you're really competent and highly regarded in, and then they listen to you, and you can make the connections. So I think that's one big way of doing it, and it also helps each person find their way in life with so they may have a more conventionally acceptable profession, as well as this kind of secret love affair with astrology, and then they can make the two come together in really fruitful ways.
I love thinking of that. Each one of us finding our own Trojan horse, finding that
Right.
that gateway into the larger community, and then just astrology can come at the right time, and it's perfect. Okay, so many more questions coming from everything that you're saying. I love asking this question from time to time from certain astrologers, and I would love to ask it to you. Why do you think astrology works? Like, what is, and I know I'm asking you to explain the great mystery, but what are the mechanisms by which it actually works?
I suspect that it's less of a mechanism and more of a kind of organic spiritual unity that informs all things. There's a passage from Plotinus that the great ancient classical philosopher, the founder of Neoplatonism, and one of the highly regarded as really the greatest of the late classical philosophers before, and he was having in one of his writings, he was countering people who did not believe in astrology and rejected it outright, but also countering astrologers who who regarded the planets and the stars as, in some sense, causing us to be a certain way in a kind of simplistic, deterministic way. And he wanted to say that the heavens really need to be regarded more as they are indicative of, they're signs of the archetypal dynamics of the world's soul at any given time, the anima mundi, the soul of the world. And he said, the heavens are, the stars are like a language, a script that's been written out across the heavens, and it carries significance, it carries meaning. And he said, everything in the world is full of signs. Everything in the world is interconnected. And then he says, as has been said, everything breathes together. And the beauty of that phrase is that, for me, is that it's recognizing that, contrary to that tendency within the modern consciousness to feel that we're kind of isolated, what Alan Watts called skin encapsulated egos, and that we are just each kind of trapped in our own crania. We each have our own cranium that is separate, and this is where our consciousness is, and everything else out there is in a completely separate category of being. And what he's getting at is the sense that if everything is breathing together, in some sense, there is a kind of, everything is animated. Anima means soul, it means spirit, it means the breath of life, and like the wind. But there's an organic spiritual unity to everything, in the sense that our very best up-to-date cosmology tells us as well, which is that human beings are not on this earth. We are the earth in human form. And the earth and human beings are not in the cosmos so much as we are the cosmos in earthly or in human expression. And so the fact that when we go deep inside ourselves and tap into our depths, the fact that we're not just tapping into something that's just inside my private little brain corner here. We're tapping into our depths, are of our interior selves, are continuous with the depths of the interior of the cosmos. And so I believe that astrology works more. I mean, I love Jung's conception of synchronicity, because he really has, instead of thinking of it as like Newtonian billiard balls in which the planets, through some electromagnetic force or gravity or something like that, causes things to happen on this plane. Rather, there's just a coherence between what is happening in the heavens and what is happening here. There's that events in the inner world and the outer world have an intrinsic connective tissue. There, a couple moments ago, I heard the birds singing in your, behind you out in the lovely backyard that you. Well, I don't know if it's a backyard, but anyway, it's the garden out there,
Mm-hmm.
and it's so. And it reminded me of how Jung would pay attention in the middle of his psychotherapy sessions. He would pay attention to how, when the energies, the emotions would get constellated within the consulting room between his patient and himself and so forth, and what a dream might be being shared or whatever. And in the outside world, he would pay attention to when the wind would be picking up, or the waves would lap on the shore there of Lake Zurich, outside his garden window, or birds would suddenly a flock of birds would suddenly land or suddenly take off, and he would pay attention to that because he saw everything as being interconnected, and he was able to kind of read the symbolic meanings in the unfolding of life in the same way that other people read the newspaper. He was just symbolically, he had a highly developed symbolic capacity for discernment at that level. And that's what astrology, I think, gives to all of us, is it helps us cultivate our capacity to see the symbolic and archetypal meanings that are unifying and patterning our life, both in our personal lives, but also our collective life that we're all living together and breathing together, or during COVID and the climate crisis, dealing with breathing together in many other ways. Also, social injustice and injustice, like I can't breathe. We're all not breathing, or we're all breathing together, and at some level. And that's why I believe astrology also has relevance for our social justice and ecological justice aspirations. That's getting off to another topic, though.
But it does bring me to a question that came in from our inner circle, that one of our inner circle members, that I would love to ask you. It's from Lee Saul. And the question is, it seems that in our current Western psyche, we are at a stage of either or, left or right, in which half are wrong, right? Depending on which side you fall on. Do you see this continuing for an extended length of time, or will the cosmos lend a hand to shift this into more balance and collaboration?
Well, of course, I don't know. I certainly, I have hope. There are so many people working hard to bring about a more collaborative life together. There's also a tendency in life, both personal life and collective life, where things evolve, things change, everything passes. This too will pass. I don't know how long that will take, and I do know that we're in more danger now as a result of these, not just the divisions, but the depth to which different individuals and parties are living in different realities, or are willing to spin fabricated realities, which divide us even more. And of course, there's ways in which social media can amplify that or overcome it. But I think the more those of you who are listening to our conversation here, those of you who are, part of the Astrology Hub world, for example, the more that you and we are pursuing our own highest aspirations, and also bringing our astrological insight into living more consciously and more compassionately and more courageously, then that's going to make a difference. Even things that, those of us who do not have our fingers on the levers of power in the White House or the Senate or in multinational corporate headquarters and boardrooms, nevertheless, everything you do counts, even in the privacy of your own dreams and of your own meditations, and the interactions that you have with those you are closest to, your children, your parents, your partner, your spouse, your friends, people at work, people you're not getting along with, and every interaction counts. It goes into the collective, It's not just isolated in that room that it happened in, because everything, we're all much more permeably interconnected, and it ripples out. It ripples out in many ways, some more obvious than others, but nothing happens in isolation in this world. So um, the planets are moving, and they keep moving. And for example, we've just been we're coming out of uh, over a decade we've of that long Uranus square Pluto that we had, and we went right from that into the Saturn conjunction with Pluto, and then the Saturn square Uranus, and that kind of sequence of three major outer planet hard aspects. Hard aspects, I'll just mention. I mean, every hard aspect has its gifts, and I mean hard in the sense that yes, experiences can be hard under the hard aspects like the square, the opposition, the conjunction, but uh, they it's the hard aspects that make things happen, and during which we, in a sense, grow and have to grow and expand and deepen our consciousness in order to come to terms with the tensions between the archetypal forces that are at work. So we're just coming out of this quite. We're not out of the Saturn square Uranus is really cooking right as we speak, and of course the forces between the old and the new, between generations, between the entrenched past and the impulses for bringing about a new world, but also the resistance. It's not that Saturn it's not just on the side of conservative reactionary resistance that is stopping a great new world from emerging. Saturn can also be a the wisdom of knowing what is valuable to hold on to, and how to and how, when to regulate or restrain or wisely discipline the whether it's the free market or our free instinctual self-expression or whatever. It's some we have to bring together these opposing principles, hold the tension of opposites between Saturn and Uranus in this case, and then bring about a creative synthesis that honors both archetypes. And to that extent, when you bring together what Jung calls this conjunctio oppositorum, this conjunction of opposites that had been in tension, and if you don't just fall onto one side or the other and then demonize the other, but instead find ways to bring forth and express the most life-enhancing expressions of each of the archetypes involved, then something, a birth happens, something remarkable takes place, a kind of divine birthing happens where what we might not have been able to envision before it was born can emerge. But we have to go through that birth contraction for the birth to take place, and that birth contraction often involves a death contraction, a dying to an old identity or an old way of looking at things, and we all have that threshold of transformation upon us right now as part of the human experiment.
Mm.
Oh no,
Rick,
I was going to say about that we're
yeah.
moving into, this the trine of Uranus and Pluto is starting to come. It will be coming in more and more during the 2020s. That often brings a more confluent relationship between the Promethean Uranian energies of awakening to the new, or of bringing new creative freedoms and insights and technological advances, but bringing it in a less fraught way than the square when Pluto comes into the trine, that kind of evolutionary drive. Um, and in addition, that we've got a Jupiter-Neptune conjunction coming up very shortly this spring, and I think that can bring over the several months of that, much of the rest of the year, that Jupiter-Neptune conjunction can really heighten our sense of being in touch with the invisible dimension, of reality, our spiritual aspirations. Big dreams can happen to people. I'm using that term the way Jung used it. Like, big dreams are like dreams that carry big significance, greater significance. Can be very good for experiences, artistic experiences, whether it's film or music, that allow the imagination to just expand and soar. Those are all great Jupiter-Neptune possibilities. So life keeps evolving, and we're definitely in a tremendous multi-dimensional crisis that I know our podcast here right now, our discussion right now, is not going to solve, let alone fully address. But I think we're in a birth, and I have faith in the universe, that any universe that could create the astrological cosmos, that is, this cosmos in which heaven and earth are so meaningfully connected, where the orchestration of the movements of the planets and the movements of our lives, the patterns of experience we have, where that's so harmoniously, brilliantly coordinated. Any universe that has that kind of power, that kind of aesthetic majesty, is a universe that is in some sense caring about this earth and caring about every individual on it, who has their own unique birth chart and who's going through their own unique transits relative to their chart, and therefore going through their own experiences and have their own journey to an own path to traverse. I think the universe cares. Astrology is a kind of act of love expressed towards the earth, this moving center of cosmic meaning. And it's an act of love expressed towards every individual and every moment. Every moment has its own meaning, its own signature, its own, the gods are coming together in their own unique way to flower under this moment. And so all those give me a sense of trust in a larger evolutionary unfolding taking place than we can possibly nail down with our finite intellects. We're participating in something. I think our participation is crucial, but I don't think. But it's much bigger than anything, and much more mysterious than anything we can wrap our minds fully around.
I love what you're saying, Rick. And it's both expansive, and you've also given us very practical ways that we can participate. And some of the key things that you've mentioned is finding the things that feel natural and easy, not easy, but what I got was the things that are natural for you, that you naturally excel in, that you are naturally good at, that bring you joy and that serve others. And that every single thing we're doing actually matters. Like we're actually a part of a bigger whole, and there's ripple effects for everything we do, whether or not anybody sees it. It doesn't matter. There are ripple effects that we can have. So as we're all part of this collective birth, and as we're all dreaming into this new world that we would like to create and participate and live in, staying focused on those things that we can do in our every moment of life is our act of participation in the whole of that new reality emerging. And what you said too about this astrology being an act of love, and astrology being when I had my first astrology reading, I was 13 years Catholic school. I had studied all the world religions in college. I had my master's in psychology. I had always all these questions that still remained unanswered. None of it ever really answered. But I had that first astrology reading, and it was my first evidence of a divine intelligence, heart, whatever you want to call it, that did care. I felt like, oh my gosh, something somewhere, somehow that I could never explain does care. And my life does have meaning and purpose. And the fact that this person could look at this circle and some squiggles and actually articulate it is a miracle. Like it's incredible to me. And and it brought me to tears in that moment. So everything you're saying is so true. And something else you said before about ancient civilizations or other cultures where astrology was so much more accepted as part of this enchanted world that we live in, they didn't believe it. They knew it because they were having, they had felt lived experience of it, because they were having experiences like you had every night in Esalen. Just it's very different than like, oh, I'm intellectually believing something. No, I actually know it in every cell of my body to be true. And so there's this opportunity for us in this time of birthing to have these kinds of experiences with the universe, these real co-creative experiences where we're participating in the birth and the creation of something totally new. And I feel like you just, I don't want to say gave us permission, because that isn't what I really mean, but you just validated that every single thing that we're doing, it does have meaning, it does have purpose, and it matters. And so just keep doing that, right?
Yeah, you said it beautifully. We could just use your last 3 minutes, and then people just have the whole thing right there.
I love the way you said it, and bring it in Plato and everything. I mean, it's your life is a demonstration of these things.
Well, you've really your own life history that you just briefly shared there is just so evocative of everything that I was talking about, and I think there's this. I think as human, as Homo sapiens, the human species has evolved, and our civilizations have evolved, the spiritual dimension of life and the divine manifests itself in an evolving way, and it comes through at different times in different ways, and in different cultures in different ways. And I mean, there were periods when, for example, the divine and the spiritual dimension of life and our moral evolution were completely being carried and by the various powerful religions of the world, whether it was was and is Christianity, Judaism, and Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, Islam, and so forth, and the great wisdom traditions as well. And my microphone here, just, can you hear me okay?
Yes. It did change a little bit, but did you just put it back in? Okay, there we go. Yes.
Okay. And I think what you've just described, and in a way what I experienced as well, is a way in which you and I both were educated within the Catholic world, and I think in certain ways got very good educations, and then we've gone on to our other, in my case, like secular universities, and then Esalen being even a whole nother countercultural kind of educational world. But there's a way in which the astrological disclosure that is happening in our time in a new way, partly because the outer planets have been discovered and a whole nother domain of understanding has happened, partly in that through telescopes, also the arrival of computers, much greater accuracy in being able to know where the planets are at different times over the centuries, day by day, minute by minute. Knowing also, having way more access to the birth charts of many more people. We we see more astrological charts in a day than a lot of astrologers saw in a decade in earlier centuries. What a different situation we're in, and I think one of the things I really want to urge, astrology is a great gift, but it's also something that we need to bring our best capacities for moral awareness, being ethical in how you give interpretations to people. Do you leave them with a sense of just, wow, that person is telling me this is how I've got to go and therefore I'm going to go that way? Or do you give them a better sense of self-understanding where they make their own choices? Do you leave them discouraged because you told them, oh, you've got these really bad transits coming up? Or do you leave them encouraged because you've given them a more a richer sense of what their life is about and what kinds of energies they will be entering into, given what they are bringing into it from their own predispositions and capacities. We have to, and also bringing in our rigor. One thing about the academic world is that it has developed high standards of intellectual rigor, scholarly rigor, that if you make a statement that this is the case, then one should have very good evidence behind it to support it, and not just have that on the basis of seeing one or two correlations that kind of, tickled your fancy, but and then you tell people as if this is biblical truth. And they may not be in a position to be able to assess accurately how reliable what you just said is, so they take it as like, well, that's the cosmic will that they've just told me. That's a danger that astrologers have. So whether it's our writing as astrologers, our teaching, or our consultations, giving readings, whatever it is, or even with our own work on understanding ourselves, we really want to bring all the most developed capacity for real rigor and compassion and ethical care, because this is a powerful gift. It's not just just one more kind of potentially useful psychological trick or something like that. This is or technique. This is a powerful mystery. It's a kind of spiritual power in itself, and we have to raise ourselves to be adequate vessels of its expression through us, and so that we can be forces of betterment in people's lives and enhancement, and not limiting them because we're scared of Saturn or Pluto transits or something in our own lives, and we haven't gone through the inner work that is necessary to come to a richer, deeper understanding of the energies that we're speaking about. It's a lifelong process for all of us, but I think it's important to commit ourselves to being to raising ourselves to be worthy recipients of this gift that the universe is giving us.
It goes back to what you were saying in the beginning about those who are initiated into the mysteries. And what you're describing is there's somewhat of a constant initiation. At each new level of awareness, we have to check ourselves and make sure that we're not falling into patterns where the practice of astrology becomes more harmful than it is helpful. And that requires active diligence, I think. And thank you for reminding us, for voicing that, and for standing as a beacon of that for us, and especially for people that are just getting into the field and starting to learn. And there's this real tendency to, I know a few things about astrology, so now I'm going to present myself as the expert. And it can get pretty tricky. When is it okay for you to step into that role? When are you holding yourself back and feeling never worthy? Which is also another trap that people can fall into.
Very
So
much. Yeah.
yeah, so it's, you know, there's this balancing act, and each one of us having to assess within ourselves what feels right and true, and sometimes fall down and make mistakes and then, you know, learn from it, hopefully. But Rick, this has just been such a delight, and I am so grateful for this opportunity to speak with you and to learn from you and to learn from your experiences of life. And I know that there is another great work that has been created out of the work that you've done. So out of Cosmos and Psyche, as one of the inspirations for the movie Changing of the Gods, which is a 10-part docuseries, which will be available at the end of February. You can sign up to get access to that documentary for free now. And if you're interested, any of you, you can go to astrologyhub.com/changing of the gods. But Rick, can you tell us just a little bit, you know, I know we'll have other opportunities to talk about this, but a little bit about your involvement in the docuseries and why you feel it's an important work to be shared with the world right now.
Sure. The series was made by a group of filmmakers who, particularly led by the co-founder of Bioneers, the very admirable community of people working on behalf of ecological social justice, and the film is inspired by Cosmos and Psyche and focused on particularly how the tremendous kind of historical and social movements and developments of the last 10, 15 years are connected to the Uranus-Pluto alignment, and also with the larger history of planetary cycles that those of you who've read Cosmos and Psyche can see that I tracked out, that I traced out. And so while I didn't make this film, it informs the film in a kind of foundational way, but in a way the film is a kind of marriage of Cosmos and Psyche with a kind of social, ecological, scientific impulse or set of aspirations and movements that Bioneers in particular has been carrying. So there's many other voices that are in this documentary series, and each episode is focused on a particular aspect of our cultural historical life. Like one's on women's rights and feminism and the women's suffrage movement and liberation movements. Another is on civil rights and the abolitionist movement, and another one is on scientific revolutions. Another's on technological revolutions, and another one's on sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I mean, it's a whole the 10-part series covers a number of major themes and traces them out historically, as I did with Cosmos and Psyche. But Cosmos and Psyche is done with words on a page, and this is done in a cinematic video film form with great with many voices, many experts in different fields being interviewed, and all the dynamics that the kind of dynamic communication that is possible when you're using film and music and words, all in and archival historical footage and so forth, all in creative ways. And they've done a very fine job in. I admired a great deal. They did consult with me, and I am interviewed, frequently in the series, but it's an independent work, and it's actually one that I could not have imagined how they would take my written book and translate that into a cinematic form. But I really admire how the team there Kenny Ausable, the co-founder of Pioneers, working with particularly I think Max de Arman and Theo Badashi, both of whom were graduate students with me at CIS, and so they really knew. They not only know how to make films, but they also happen to be very well educated within the archetypal perspective and et cetera. And then also Louis Schwartzberg lent his cinematography skills to the task, and many others contributed. So that's basically it. There's going to be, as you say, there's going to be the launch takes place in a series of steps during the month of February, and then it's kind of fully launched by, I think, February 22nd, I think. Yeah, that's right, 2/22/22, easy to remember.
Yes. Yes, perfect. So if you're interested in viewing the 10-part docuseries, there's going to be a period of time where it is available for free. And you can go to astrologyhub.com/changing of the gods. And we're particularly excited about it because of how it demonstrates astrological cycles through time and how those astrological cycles correlate with events here on Earth, and just giving further validity to astrology as a legitimate way to both analyze what's happening, but also to look forward to what might happen. And I'd love to just finish with that question, Rick. The question that came from our community, particularly, here's a question from Becky from our audience, our Inner Circle membership, actually. And Becky asks, do you think that if there were a more universal and widespread understanding and acceptance of astrology, might certain world events have played out differently? So, for example, with the recent Saturn-Pluto transits or past Uranus-Pluto transits, the archetypal energies may have manifested on the lighter end of these forms, as opposed to their shadow sides being more evident. So I think the question really being, if we have an awareness of these cycles and transits before they happen, do you think that we as humanity would be playing out the higher potentials versus falling into the lower tendencies of these patterns?
So I think in the same way that astrological knowledge can help each of us as an individual live more intelligently, more consciously, so that we're not puppets of the archetypes. And if you have a sense of the range of ways in which every planetary principle or force can come through, and that we as human beings have a potential freedom or agency that we can bring to how they are expressed. Once you get that, then having a deeper astrological knowledge can, I think, help us live better lives. And if that's true on the individual level, I think it's true on the collective level. When 9/11 happened under the Saturn-Pluto opposition, prior to this conjunction that coincided with the pandemic, I wrote an essay that got distributed a lot it's called Notes on the World Trade Center or something like that. Notes on the Fall of the Twin Towers. And it's on my cosmosandpsyche.com website in the essays page. And it got passed around a lot on the internet, and I kind of was, among other things that I was doing in that kind of archetypal analysis of how much what had just happened was an expression of the Saturn-Pluto alignment that was taking place, and how could we respond to it in a way that was faithful to the nature of Saturn and Pluto, recognized what it's about, but didn't get caught in tendencies towards, for example, projecting the shadow just on that enemy that's over there, and then getting into a kind of hyper-armored militaristic will to power although the New York publishers were very interested in having that actually, that's why they came back to me and said, we don't want to wait any longer for Cosmos and Psyche to come out. So please, here, stop teaching for a while. Here's enough money to stop teaching, and you can write, so you can finally finish Cosmos and Psyche. But that response was not necessarily the response that the Bush-Cheney administration adopted in Washington, and nor the world as a whole. I think we can, I mean, just seeing the patterns, like how much I thought, God, we could so easily get into another Vietnam, for example, which of course we ended up doing by going, the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan and so forth. And because the Vietnam War began under the preceding Saturn-Pluto opposition. And, you could just see the cyclical pattern there. And I wanted to bring that to consciousness there so that those who had ears to hear could live more consciously, knowing how we could respond in better ways. I really agree with the implication of the person who asked this question, which is that, or at least the possibility that was it a she was
Becky.
Becky, right, was bringing up. What happens for us as individuals happens for us as a society. I think that's always a potential. It's not given. Astrology doesn't automatically make us better people any more than going to church or having an ayahuasca journey automatically makes a person a better person. It takes moral and spiritual and psychological effort on our own part as well. But you bring those together and these become very powerful tools for the good. So I do think that there is that possibility. I want to just also say you did a great job of describing what Changing of the Gods is about in terms of following the kind of bringing astrology into a wider public audience in a way that they can recognize how it shines a light on these larger cyclical patterns in history and the connections between the planets' movements and history's movements. And one of the things I didn't say that might be important to convey here is simply that I finished Cosmos and Psyche in 2005, and it was published in early 2006. So the whole Uranus square Pluto period happened after that. So in a way, what the film does is it takes, well, here's what was set out in Cosmos and Psyche happening under all the other Uranus-Pluto alignments of the last 500 years or more. And here are the archetypal themes that the author pointed out seem to be most vividly expressed during these big periods, like the French Revolutionary epoch, or the turn of the 20th century, or and so forth. And so let's see what happens during the 20 teens, and how much does that period of the 2007 to 2020, roughly, of that long square, how much does that kind of fulfill the historical patterning that Richard Tarnas discerned in history? And so that's partly what the film is a kind of investigation of what actually did happen. And in that sense, it's a kind of independent sequel to Cosmos and Psyche, and I think very, very helpful in that way.
Very true. It definitely fills in that gap of time, which is great. Rick, thank you so much for spending this much time with us. It has just been something that I have treasured, and I'm sure our community will treasure as well. It's very exciting that we have the opportunity to see that commentary on how Cosmos and Psyches actually began to play out through the teens and into 2020 with Changing of the Gods. And just looking forward to more opportunities to connect with you and your work. And if you haven't picked up a copy of Cosmos and Psyche yet, it'd be great to do. But I also have a note to myself to pick up your first one, which was the setup for Cosmo and Psyche, which is called the Passion of the Mind.
The Passion of the Western Mind.
The Passion of the Western Mind, which I didn't realize was, now having the story in the context of why you wrote that, it was really to set up Cosmos and Psyches. It's like, oh, I would love to read that now as well. So thank you. And I look forward to—
My pleasure.
To
my
more
pleasure, Amanda. You're a great interviewer, made it very easy to share things. And thank you also for sharing your beautiful journey with respect to astrology, because I think that depicts quite eloquently the role that astrology can play, and in kind of opening up to us a sense that sense that you had, that, wow, this is a kind of like the divine cares about me in a certain way, and it's paying attention. Like my birth is meaningful in a larger cosmic context. That's quite an important spiritual gift, and thank you for sharing that.
It's what drives the work that we do at Astrology Hub. It's why there's so much passion to sharing the gifts of astrology with the world, because for more people to feel like they're actually connected and their lives matter and they are cared for, I just think everything would be different. If people knew that. Yes.
You're doing great work there. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you so much. And thanks to all of you for being here. Thank you for being a part of our community. And as always, thank you for making astrology a part of your life. We'll catch you on the next episode. Take care, everybody.